Good afternoon. Welcome to DMC Sports podcast, talking all things Chesterfield today. We're doing a special purely over the takeover, which was confirmed and rubber stamped yesterday. It starts a new era for the club, similar to that in 2001, but hopefully this time there'll be a little bit more long-term success. I'm joined today by two of Derbyshire Media Company's finest reporters. We've got Chesterfield's chief writer for us, Holly Bacon, and Derbyshire's best Gareth Southgate lookalike, Matt Rhodes. He's also a lifelong Chesterfield fan, and he's the Matlock town reporter for us as well. Afternoon to you both. I'm going to start by talking to Holly. Holly, you've been at the Spireites Stadium, or Technique as it's now known for us, week by week, home and away, Tuesdays, Saturdays for the last few years. What is the overall mood at the moment, and how has it changed in recent months?
Well, I think the last couple of years it's been very doom and gloom, hasn't it? You know, the Spireites Stadium as it has been, it seems sort of very toxic. Certainly, I'd say that's the best word I could use to describe it. And I think that's down to everyone who was at the organisation, really. I think, you know, even sort of the employees at the club, you know, I don't really know sort of how they felt going to work, and, you know, and the fans as well on a match day. It was just very sort of toxic, and it's something that's really needed to change. And I think, you know, this takeover hopefully will do that. Certainly by the reaction of the fans the last couple of days, it kind of feels like a weight's sort of been lifted off everyone's shoulders.
And you were there with me yesterday at the press conference, talking to the new chairman and the vice chairman and the co-vice chairman as well. The key word throughout, there were two words actually. One was stability, but the one I'll talk about at the minute is transparency. And that was on their community charter as well, which they had either side of the bench for the press conference. They had their 5 steps with what we are going to expect to see from the Communoty Trust led club. Transparency was the one, I think it was on everybody's lips yesterday.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when you're running a football club, you know, you've got to be transparent. I think one of the things sort of said yesterday, I think by Mike Goodwin, that, you know, if the team gets relegated, you know, that's fair enough. But as long as there is transparency through the club and you know what's happening, that's a really important thing. Yeah,
Matt, that's something. I'll bring you in on this. Holly mentioned there about relegation, and that's not the end of the world. As a fan and as a journalist as well, covering the club, what would you deem successful? There was a lot of talk yesterday about on-the-field success being balanced with off-the-field success. Obviously, balancing the books has to be the priority for the club at the moment. 7-figure losses year on year. Yes, the club's debt-free, and we have to give credit to Dave Allen and Ashley Carson for leaving the club debt-free, albeit that the loans to the council, of course. But on the field success, yesterday, Mike Goodwin, as Holly alluded to there, said relegation is a possibility. They're targeting a top half finish. They said they don't want to be scraping or battling with relegation. But he did make very, very clear that's not to say that that's what we'd be happy with. That's not to say that's the target, but that's almost the minimum requirement. Would a mid-table finish this season be enough for you as a fan, with your fan hat on, to be happy?
I think, considering what's happened within the last 5 years, yes, because it sounds a bit weird to say that, obviously, because Chesterfield are normally always in the Football League, and it might sound to some people that finishing just mid-table in the National League might seem a bit unambitious, but considering what has happened within the last 5 years, I would accept that, because it's been, 5 years since Chesterfield's had a season that hasn't involved the relegation dogfight, and that now covers 3 different leagues that's happened. So for the past 5 years, for everyone going to the game and paying their money, they're seeing their team usually lose, not to put too fine a point on it. So I think as long as the team I'd say in terms of what would be successful is, if you can make sure they don't have a relegation dogfight, that would be a breath of fresh air, literally just to have that. And as long as the club is financially stable and the relationship is good between the board, The manager's popular anyway, but between the staff and the fans, then that'll be a success, because I've been to Chesterfield fans where the atmosphere is absolutely electric and it's been fantastic, but within especially the last 3 years, it's not been good, but I completely understand why. So if there's a season where we're actually winning as many games as they are losing, and the crowds are high compared to what it's been in the last 4 years, and there's no PR disasters, which there has been, then yeah, I would genuinely say that's a successful season, yeah.
I'm going to bring in the club that you cover, of course, Matlock Town, because at one point last season, we had a situation where Chesterfield were in the relegation zone and Matlock were in the playoff places.
Yeah.
And as it stood, there was a high chance that the two could be playing league football next season. Obviously, that didn't happen, thankfully, from Chesterfield's point of view. But does that show the decline we've seen in the last 5 years? We've gone from Preston in the playoffs, very close to Championship football, to a very real possibility of having league rivalries with Alfreton Town and Matlock Town.
Yeah, I mean, in the last sort of 12, 18 months, I mean, I was sort of preparing myself basically for the very real prospect that Chesterfield were going to go into regional football, because there were times where I really couldn't see, even in the National League, where wins were going to come from, because no one at the club, in terms of like a player or part of the staff or part of the board, seemed confident and looked frightened, to be honest, after every game. So I didn't really see where a win was going to come from. And I know John Sheridan got a lot of stick for the last sort of 6 months of his time at Chesterfield, but he did do a good job initially in keeping Chesterfield up in the National League, because I really couldn't see how it was going to happen. So, it would have been, I was sort of bracing myself, and I think a lot of fans were as well, because there were some fans, I'm not sure if it was a majority, but there were some fans that were genuinely saying, I'd prefer to see the club go kaput and basically start again as like AFC Chesterfield or something like that, rather than go down into National League North with the people who were in charge at that time. So it was very, very real, the prospect of going into regional football, and it just would have been more proof that the club it just wasn't the same club anymore, and the identity has just gone. But with what's happened recently, the main thing is that the identity does seem to be back, and people feel like they actually support Chesterfield again, rather than this tin pot variation of it.
Don't miss your words, will you, Matt? Now, Holly, Matt told there a lot about the fans that have stayed away and they've stopped going to the club. Fans, of course, are the lifeblood of football clubs. Do you think fans will start to come back now, regardless of whether the club is successful on the pitch or not? Do you see fans coming back to the club in great numbers?
Well, obviously we've got COVID, but regardless of that, we'll pretend that hasn't happened. I think like some fans will come back, but I think for quite a few, and it's the same with every football club really, some are only going to come back if the performances are there on the pitch and we're getting the results. But I am confident that a good number of fans would come back. And I think, COVID is going to be the factor that, really stops us in a way. Without that, I think that we could make this really successful. And I still think we can. But, I think we would have got great attendances if we wouldn't have limits.
Ollie's absolutely right. I know we were talking to Mike Goodwin yesterday about season ticket sales, and at the moment, the National League proposition for how many fans will be allowed in the ground, we would see the club having to refund some season tickets because they've sold more than they would be allowed in the stadium. That's not including walk-ins and ticket sales and away fans as well. So it is going to be a complicated situation. But the question I was trying to ask was more generally about fan involvement. You know, are fans who've basically washed their hands of it. Matt pointed out quite rightly, a lot of fans have said, fold the club. A lot of fans have said, I'm not putting any money into the club whilst these people are in charge. And lots of fans, I did a poll myself on Twitter, asking fans if they would favour, in a hypothetical situation, relegation with the Trust or promotion under Allen and Carson. And fans overwhelmingly said they'd rather go into regional football with the Trust involved than go back into the Football League with Dave Allen and Ashley Carson, which was a huge statement of the resentment that was there. Rightly or wrongly, there was a lot of mistakes made at the club, and there was a lot of ill feeling there. But surely that's a good sign for fan involvement and fans coming back when they can safely do so to support the new venture.
It is, yeah, but I suppose in a poll on Twitter it's easy to say, whereas, you know, fans have actually got to come down and support. And like I said, I think quite a lot will, but not everybody who said they are going to will, if you get what I mean. You know,
Absolutely.
I think it is a huge statement, you know, how delighted fans have been with the Trust obviously coming into the club. You know, it's no secret that they're not going to have a great deal of money to spend, and John Pemberton won't have a big budget like past managers have had the last couple of years. But the fact that fans can sort of accept that and get behind it, I think is a really big statement. And you know, hopefully fans can support the club in other ways, you know, like I think Mike Goodwin said about Spireites and also in the club shop and things like that. I think a lot more fans will be willing to spend their money back in the club, and as well as sponsors with that will be happy to get back behind the club now.
Some really good points there, one in particular about budgets. And Matt, I'm going to put this question to you. Are budgets the be-all and end-all in football? Because as Holly's quite rightly pointed out, the last couple of managers have had a huge budget. Sheridan's budget was massive. Martin Allen, I think it was Sheridan actually, wasn't it? Where Dave Allen used that quote to say he'd been given a blank checkbook last season. I'm not sure whether or not that was quite what was happening.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, we all, I think we probably did have one, certainly, if not one of the biggest budgets in the division for the last couple of seasons, and we had a relegation fight. And then you look at teams like Barrow, who have one of the smallest budgets in the league, and what they did. Burton Albion getting into the Championship springs to mind. Leicester winning the Premier League. These are all clubs who were nowhere near the top of the table when it came to playing budgets, but had great success. With the chemistry in place with the new Trust owning the club, with the manager, who the fans are supporting, and the size of the club, can we see a situation where, despite not being able to compete financially, perhaps, we can still compete on the pitch?
Yeah, I don't think budgets are the be-all and end-all. I think the most recent example of that is Wycombe Wanderers, who in comparison to other teams in their league, like Sunderland and Ipswich Town, who have obviously spent quite a few seasons in the Premier League, Wycombe's wage budget is absolutely nothing compared to what they do. But they've got the right sort of manager in, and he's assembled the right sort of players in with the little money that he's got in comparison to other teams, and he's managed to get them up into the Championship, which I don't think Wycombe have ever done before. So no, I don't think having a big budget is the be-all and end-all. I wouldn't be too concerned if Chesterfield can't maybe spend as much money as, say, other teams in the league, like, I don't know, Notts County maybe, or Wrexham, maybe teams like that. It's all about who the managers can attract and who they can scout. So, I mean, with John Pemberton, I don't know loads about John Pemberton, but he seems like he's really got his head screwed on. He knows what he will be able to do and what he can achieve with what he's got. He's not daft. He knows that he's not going to be able to overspend or anything like that. And I genuinely do think with the new people that are in charge as well, they'll learn from the mistakes that have been made in the past. I'll not name certain players because that'll be a bit unfair, but there are obviously examples where Chesterfield have spent, obviously not a lot of transfer fee money, but a lot of money on wages for certain players who it on paper would have seemed like to have been a very good signing, but it really didn't end up like that. And it's just a case of getting the right players in. And just knowing, because obviously I go to a lot of Matlock games as well, Matlock, certainly in terms of wages and money, it isn't the same as other teams in that league. And it's all about just attracting the right sort of players. Because I know Matlock have got players in, like Alex Byrne and players like that who did have offers and more money to go to other teams in the league, but they've chosen to go to Matlock. So it's all about the managers and the scouts being able to attract the right sort of players. So yeah, having a big budget, it's not the be all and end all. So if it's lower than that, I wouldn't be too concerned about it.
You're absolutely right. There has been some signings in the last couple of years, which on paper you think that's a great signing. It hasn't worked. And I think that goes back to what Holly was saying earlier about the chemistry at the club and the ill feeling, all the way through from board level down to the cleaners on the ground, which is a phrase that Mike Goodwin used yesterday. And that filtered through to the playing staff. There was that doom and gloom feeling around the stadium. And I think regardless of the players you bring in, if they're being deflated, demoralised, that's going to happen. I want to talk a little bit about wage caps. Holly, you were there yesterday when we were talking about this hypothetically in the press conference. The suggested wage cap for the National League of, I believe, it's £850,000. It seems sensible to have a wage cap. I'm told that Chesterfield will meet that and they will just be underneath. That was before this was discussed, when they set the wage budget. I'm told that the figure that was given by the National League, the club said they were just underneath that. So Chesterfield will be having a competitive wage budget next season. But this is a two-part question for you. First of all, is that a good budget? And given that some clubs won't be able to match that in the division, is it looking good despite the financial restrictions, because the trust do need to balance the books? Are we in a competitive position? And secondly, there are concerns with the wage budget being capped, that we could have a return back to brown envelopes and back payments. And I'm not suggesting that anyone at Chesterfield Football Club will do that, but certainly there are people in football who capitalise on something like that. Do you think it's realistic to impose a wage cap in non-league football?
Well, they're doing it in League One and League Two, aren't they? And I think, in non-league, you've got the lack of financial fair play as well, which, I think there should be some. And I think, especially with COVID, I think there should be a wage cap. Really, do I think that our budget will be competitive next season? Well, if it's just below that mark, I don't feel like you can complain about that, really. And especially, after the trust have taken over the club. And as we know, unlike when we were under the ownership of Dave Alton, we've not got millions and millions that could be spent on the club. I think, to be honest, it could work in our favour, because in the National League, there's a lot of teams who've got a lot of money. And, we've seen a couple of seasons ago with Salford winning promotion. I'm sure without that investment, they'd be nowhere near even the National League. So I think it'll be good for Chesterfield, and also, it might help us attract players, because I'm sure a lot of them would rather come and play for Chesterfield on similar wages to another team, if you get what I mean.
Absolutely. Matt, do you think wage cap in the National League is going to benefit Chesterfield or hinder them, perhaps?
I don't think it will hinder them too much. I think it is a decent idea as well. I think it's probably time that stuff like this was brought in, because there is such a massive divide sometimes with certain teams who can spend so much more than other teams, and it's like we're not even in league football, and you've got such a huge divide. Like a few years ago, it had only really happened sort of like in the Premier League, but it's now even gone into non-league football. It's even in Matlock's level, where crazy amount of wage money is being offered to players who are not really even professional. It's absolutely mad. But I can't see it being a thing that'll hinder too much. I think, as Holly pointed out before as well, if you've got like a if you've got a player that you really want to get at your club, and you know for sure that another team can't offer pretty much any more money than what you're able to, with the stature that Chesterfield have, because obviously they're in league football for almost 100 successive years. For the same sort of money, you would think players would go to a club like Chesterfield over other clubs that don't quite have the same sort of history and stature. So I don't think it'd hinder Chesterfield too much at all.
Obviously, you cover the MPL to a great level of detail, and you're familiar with not just our local sides, but clubs further afield as well. We're both aware there are some clubs offering. I've seen some players on £800 a week in the Northern Premier League, and I've seen a lot of players who have dropped from the National League, North, South, and the National League to the MPL because clubs are offering more money than teams higher up the pyramid. Do you think that's going to be beneficial or not in the long run? The reason I ask that is I have a concern that at the moment we're already seeing players drop a division for more money. But if we then see a wage cap in the National League, including the North and South, that's only going to get worse. Does that then encourage dangerous levels of finance in a less sustainable division with smaller clubs, in theory, smaller clubs, who are then likely to have a little bit of success in the short term, but then in the mid to long term are going to have to fold or reform or have financial difficulties?
I would be a bit concerned about sort of like the amount of money being spent. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, if you've got the money, spend it. I mean, I don't, as long as the money has been rightfully put there and there's no dodgy dealings behind it. I mean, spend it as you wish to. So if you want to spend it on high wages on a player, that's completely up to that club's prerogative. So that's fine for them to do that, but it does seem a little bit unfair to an extent where like a team can afford so much wage money on players. Because I know some players that can definitely play at higher levels, but because the money is pretty decent that they can be offered, they'll settle for playing in the third tier of non-league football. So, it sort of sets a little bit of a worrying precedent. But the main reason I think that is because of how uncertain the next few months are going to be with COVID-19, because it worries me a little bit that a few people think we're sort of like the worst is over. There's no 100% certainty that this season coming up will come to a natural end, because no one knows what the next few months are going to be. I know already pre-season friendlies have already had to be cancelled because of precautionary measures, which is the term I've been used to describe that without going into details. And that's already matches that can't go ahead. And obviously with crowds not being allowed in, and I don't know when that's going to be addressed, because there are certain areas of society where you are encouraged to go to these places and that's deemed as fine, but for some reason, even at Chesterfield's level, there are no spectators allowed whatsoever. And if that keeps on going for even 2 months, let's say, not necessarily to Chesterfield, because they're probably in a stronger position than a lot of other teams, but other teams like Dover Athletic, who are really in dire straits, if another couple of months are going without no crowds whatsoever, they're in serious trouble, not just of like, getting relegated, of going completely. So there is a little bit of a worry about sometimes the amount of money that's spent, because there is a danger that a team might spend so much money and then in a couple of months' time the season might have to be paused again because of the amount of local lockdowns that could be in place. And yeah, so caution would be how I'd want clubs to go about it. Like, doesn't matter what club you are, whether how much money you've got, caution will be the best way to go about it.
And of course, if next season's anything like this season, there could be a tactical advantage for teams who tend to have a strong season and tail off as well. Because if we do have another situation where we have to call the season early, and you're absolutely right, we could be in a position where we only play a handful of games, and you would presume the season will be null and void if you played less than half of the games. But teams who tend to be up there in Christmas, January time, and then tail off, might find themselves in a position where actually we do that again this season, and the season gets called in February, then we might be in a strong finishing position. So might be that I don't see whether that would be a good thing or a bad thing for Chesterfield necessarily, just a point to think about. Before we finish, I want to do some fan questions. I had a few questions coming in, so thank you for those. I've picked the best two. There's one from Joseph Roberto. Do you think clubs being owned by Communoty Trust will be more common due to COVID? Holly, I'll let you answer this one first, and then Matt, I'll come in for your opinions as well.
Well, I think with Chesterfield's position, we're really lucky to be owned by the Trust, and we're really lucky that we've had help from both Chesterfield Borough Council and Derbyshire County Council. You know, £500,000 each is a lot of money. Do I think it'll be more common? Yes, if trusts are able to do it, but like I say, we've been lucky with that. But obviously, you know, COVID, like Matt's just said there, it's going to land clubs in a lot of financial trouble, especially if it doesn't get up and started soon.
Matt?
Yeah, I think. Sorry, you're gonna have lost my train of thought. Sorry, just
you know, baby brain doesn't start for the dad until after the baby's born. Matt, the question was from Joseph Roberto. He said, "Do you think clubs being owned by Communoty Trusts will be more common due to COVID?"
Yeah, I think it's a possibility because it all depends on if Chesterfield's run with this goes well. I think it would genuinely encourage more people that have maybe thought about doing this kind of thing before to actually go ahead with it. So it might not happen like within the near future where you see a few of these instances take place, but it might happen in the long-term future where if it goes fine with Chesterfield and if they end up even getting promoted back to the Football League with the way in which this club is run, it might encourage other people that have maybe thought about doing something like this before to go ahead and try and do this with a club that is in dire straits as well. So yeah, I'd say probably not within like the near future, because obviously with how uncertain things are as well, but it wouldn't surprise me in the long term if more clubs do go in this direction where it's like a registered charity that actually takes over.
My opinion, Joseph, for what it's worth, if you're at all interested, I would say two things. I don't think it's any less common because it is quite unusual. There's not many clubs that have done this sort of thing. But I think if any Communoty Trust is going to have success doing something like this, it's Chesterfield. I think we are something of a leader when it comes to this sort of thing. It's the Communoty Trust has been held in high regard for a long time. It's been making a huge amount of profits, which obviously are reinvested in the community, but nonetheless, it's got very healthy books and bank balances. It does some superb work. It started, of course, Walking Football. That was started at the Pro Act. The people involved have ran it superbly well, and I'm sure they'll do exactly the same with the club. So that's what I think regarding that. We'll have one more question. George Ventris, where do you see the club in 10 years' time, and what are your aims next season? Holly, if you want to start again.
Well, this is a hopeful outlook, but hopefully in the Football League and sustainable off a pitch in a short and simple answer.
Absolutely. Matt, I'll say the question again for you, just to remind you.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Where do you see the club in 10 years' time, and what are your aims for next season?
In 10 years' time, I would not expect, but I would certainly hope that Chesterfield are at least in League Two. It doesn't really matter what position, to be honest. Just hope that they're back in the Football League, and like Holly said, are just in a comfortable state financially, especially considering what's going on at the moment. For next season, I would just hope for at least top half. Obviously, Pemberton will need to bring in a lot of players, because obviously there's not actually that many players that are officially signed on with Chesterfield at the moment. But all being well, maybe playoffs, all being well, and then obviously that's a little bit of a lottery. So I wouldn't be too downhearted if it's not promotion at the end of this coming season, but top half would be fine for me.
For me, George, thank you for your question. I would say I think next season we will stay up comfortably. If we were to be relegated, but we address the financial situation sufficiently, then I would still see that as success. I think you can come back from a relegation. You can't come back from bankruptcy, if I'm completely honest. So if we went down, but the finances were in a healthier state, then I wouldn't be too concerned. Of course, relegation brings about, further down the line, financial problems. I don't think we'll be in a situation like that. I think we're in a position where the club is being run well. The budget, from what I'm told, looks really competitive. We've got a good manager at the helm. We've got good owners. I think we'll be fine. In the next 10 years, I actually think if this works, and I'm quietly confident it will, I don't see why we can't get back to League One. Because we're one of those clubs where we yo-yoed between League One and League Two. Disastrous off-the-field issues led us into these uncharted waters. And we shouldn't be. It's ridiculous that we've got this far down. I actually think once we get back into the Football League, and I think we will do that, I think we'll find it very easy to get back to League One again. We've always found it easy to get to League One. It was staying in League One that was an issue until more recent times. And we find ourselves quite away from it now. So I think in the next 10 years, it very much depends on how the next 18 months go for me. But if they go as expected and they go well, then I think we'll be back in League One. And you never know, we may well have another push to the Championship. It happens every once a generation for Chesterfield. Finally, I'm just going to ask you both. I loved asking this question today, Alan, and sadly, he's now left the club. I say sadly purely because I'm not asking this anymore. Please love his response to this. The 5-year plan, the infamous 5 years to the Championship, which he told me he never actually said. Well, where would you like us to be in 5? Realistically, where would you like us to be in 5 years? Matt, I'll start with you this time.
Realistically, back in the Football League, I do think that is realistic. Obviously, it's a very difficult league to get out of because there's only one automatic promotion place. I don't know why that still is the case, because I don't think there's that much of a gap in quality between League Two and the National League. So there might even be a case in a few years' time where there are more automatic places available. But yeah, within 5 years, I think it's realistic for Chesterfield to be in League Two and have a comfortable position within League Two.
And Holly?
Yeah, I think Matt's pretty much summed my answer up as well. I really do hope that we're back in the Football League in 5 years' time.
Absolutely. That's all for today. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you to Holly and to Matt for participating. Always a pleasure, and we'll hopefully see you again very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.